afternoon, welcome to the UK Column News. It is the 25th of March 2015, it's just gone 1 o'clock. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish and Nick are here in Plymouth. And today we are joined by John Hurst, who is up north somewhere.
He's in the middle of Wales.
Oh, he's in the middle of Wales. Apologies, Wales.
He's in the middle of Wales, deepest Wales, surrounded by daffodils and sheep at the moment.
Lovely.
Well, on the subject of daffodils and spring flowers, isn't it, really? And we've got beautiful weather in Plymouth, a little bit of cloud, but we've had largely blue sky, wind's still a bit chilly, you can see your breath early in the morning. And we're going to say we think it's roughly the same across the rest of the country, with a possible exception of north of the border, of course. But David Scott will bring us up to date on that at the end of the week. Where would we like to start today? Well, it has to be the BBC. The BBC is becoming, we think, very, very dangerous indeed. Let's have a look at what the BBC has been up to over the past few days. Starting off with an email that's been sent in to us very kindly. Now, I'm not sure if this is Jill or Gil. We'll go for the lady, so we'll say it's Jill. If it's not right, I'm sure you'll let us know. What does the email say? Hi, Brian. Earlier this evening, the BBC broadcast a programme called Free Speech on the BBC Three channel, where the Conservative Party were being discussed with a panel of two journalists, a businesswoman and a government minister. At 8:40, a female member of the live audience was given the microphone, and that person asked, what are the Conservatives going to do about the abuse by social services and child stealing that is going on in their secret courts all across the country? The presenter then directed the question at the government minister, who promptly declared he was not going to comment on individual cases, although the questioner had not asked for that, and the presenter immediately switched to another question from the audience, and as the person writing into us says, no doubt with the producer screaming in his earpiece to get her off, basically. Oh well, situation normal at the BBC, supporting child abuse and trying their best to cover it up. ITV are no better. At 10:40, they broadcast a documentary about Lithuania, where apparently they're building up their home defence militia. And what the person says to us, of course, no mention of the US tanks that have been unloaded in the area in the last few days. So there we have it. The BBC once again showing unbelievable bias, and of course not only protecting itself against child abuse accusations, but simply prepared to help government ministers. And we'll say at that stage, John, what's your take on this sort of thing?
Well, it's blatant, and the more blatant it is, the more people wake up. So it's in our favour.
Well, thank you for that. Well, let's make it a little bit more blatant, because we'll carry on to the next segment, and I'd like to thank one of our viewers for highlighting this one. And it's the BBC Media Centre. BBC unveils its first fully digital general election coverage 2015. We say the LibLab con is destroying democracy and bringing in the Rainbow Coalition. What do you need to do that? Well, you need a corrupt BBC propaganda machine. But let's see what the BBC say about themselves. On the night of the 7th of May and throughout the day on the 8th of May, we, the BBC, will be offering comprehensive results and analysis fronted by the most trusted faces in broadcasting, including David Dimbleby, totally trusted, Hugh Edwards, Nick Robinson, totally trusted, Michelle Hussein, Victoria Derbyshire, etc. So the BBC here clearly believing their own propaganda, but it gets better, because let's bring in the big boss. Here he is, James Harding, director of BBC News, who says the BBC is the most trusted source of news in the UK. And more than ever, in the noisy weeks ahead, the BBC should be the place people come to for the news. News that is reliable and insightful, independent and impartial. Well, of course, this is a complete pack of lies, as anybody that really follows the BBC knows. And what have we got going on here? The BBC simply working as the LibLab con propaganda machine to help ensure that this election delivers a coalition. And if that happens, we are very, very close to, of course, a one-party state in Britain. But it gets even better. Bring on inspiring young people, because the BBC says in Generation 2015 that they're going to work flat out with hashtagging and digital companies in order to get amongst a representative sample of young people to make sure that young people who, of course, at the very young end of the spectrum know nothing about the realities of politics. So what does the BBC? It wants to get them voting. We've seen this cynical ploy north of the border, and here's the BBC now helping to make sure that a generation who really don't understand their own constitution and common law are going to vote for this corrupt selection of politicians. And what sort of people does the BBC want to use? Well, if you have a look at who's putting their material together, including the on-screen, we've got Matt Cayman. I believe it's this gentleman here. And this is his Twitter page. And of course, what is he skilled at? Tech, media and games. He's a games journalist. And you can see by the banner at the top of his site, he obviously lives in fantasy land. So an ideal man to construct the news for the BBC. I'll give you another bite at that particular cherry, John. The BBC at its best.
Indeed. I'm putting in mind of Alex Thompson's insight into the hidden agenda behind fixed-term parliaments. He mentioned it on the interview, one of the evening sessions at the conference, and he made the point that the object of the exercise is to allow coalitions to be made and then remade during the fixed term. I didn't realise until he actually pointed it out, and I'd like to do a bit more research about it. Perhaps you could have him on. But the hidden agenda is behind fixed-term parliaments was to allow coalition government, it would appear.
I would agree, and of course it's been exclusively the UK column and the British Constitution Group that highlighted that it was Julia Middleton, the chief executive of the political charity Common Purpose, that was boasting in her book Beyond Authority back in, I think, 2007, that the government wondered if there were enough people with sufficient guile to build a coalition. So this thing has been planned over many years, and of course the truth leaking out. So while the BBC utterly betrays the nation, what is the BBC certainly not reporting? Well, it's the reality of defence. And yesterday it was UK column that pointed out that David Cameron is boasting about his ability to destroy the military. So we're bringing in aircraft carriers such as the Queen Elizabeth class, which unfortunately don't have any aircraft. Now, who is reporting this? Well, perhaps not surprisingly, Russia Today. And here's their headline: aircraftless carriers, no point in new Navy vessel if no jets supplied, MPs warn. And of course, it's also been the UK column that has basically been saying that we not only have not got an operational carrier with the Queen Elizabeth, but we haven't got the second one, Prince of Wales. What a state to get into. Where did all the trouble start? Well, probably we should come back to this man.
Yeah, let's just blame him for all the problems in the world. Bound to have something to do with them. No. OK, Mr Blair, a former Blair aide, Sir Stephen Wall, has spoken out about Blair's errors over immigration, saying he failed to comprehend the EU rules over how many people could settle in the UK. Blair assured voters that only 13,000 from Eastern Europe would be allowed to come into Britain, but very quickly that figure actually... the figure that actually arrived was well over 1 million. Last week, Blair defended himself, something that he's become very, very good at, and saying it wasn't a mistake and everything's fine, and we just let in a lot more people sooner. They would have going to come anywhere. Was it a mistake? No. You lie, Mr Blair.
Well, I think Mr Blair has told the truth on this, in that it was calculated. It was deliberate.
Oh, fair enough, yes.
When you follow it through, what has happened, and as UK column has repeatedly said, this is nothing to do with the individual people that are now present in the country. Let's look at where policy came from. Was it a deliberate policy? Yes. So I think Blair is right. It was a deliberate policy, and his aide who said they screwed up, no, they didn't, because they knew perfectly well
exactly what they were doing. Yeah.
Same with David Cameron on the subject of the NHS.
Yeah, private agency nurses and doctors are being paid record sums, according to this article in The Telegraph. Locums are now racking up to £3,200 a shift, while nurses are able to charge £1,900 per day. Over the Christmas period, some hospitals were solely dependent on agency staff, and not surprisingly, those hospitals that were solely dependent are now being worst affected by their budgets. Concerns are now being raised that Easter break is going to mean more of the same. I mean, no wonder the doctors and nurses are fleeing the NHS when they're being offered this kind of money. All Jeremy Hunt had to do was just go along with what he was advised to do and give the frontline staff at the hospitals the 1% pay rise that they thoroughly deserved. Even 1%, I don't believe is enough.
But the lie, Louise, comes from the fact we have a government that's saying there is no money. This is the big lie. International bankers creating money from nothing.
Exactly.
Dragging the country into debt. All of this could be solved with the issuance of credit under the Bradbury Pound, and we'll tackle that a little bit with John. But of course, Cameron has lied and lied again about privatisation of the NHS. NHS is being privatised. It is nearly privatised, and the Conservative government and Labour lied repeatedly. More lies over in Ireland, really, about water quality.
OK, Irish government are now considering setting up measures to deduct water bills direct from people's wages and welfare payments. Proposals are still being worked on, but attachment orders are said to be included in a publication by the Irish Environment Minister Alan Kelly. Already in place in Ireland is a similar system for the property tax, and Mr Kelly apparently is drafting up compliance legislation on water charges, and his proposals will be brought to the Cabinet in the coming weeks. Those who do not register will be charged a default rate of €260 a year, with fines of €30 being added a year for single adult homes and £60 per multiple adult homes. Apparently it was also previously announced that unpaid bills can be left as a charge on the property, which will mean it will be impossible for people to sell their homes unless the debt is paid. Might be worth having a little word with Vinny.
Indeed. Corporations moving in to dictate what happens to person on the street, and then unlawful fines levied in order to force
and just
the
going
policy
directly
through.
Straight out of their accounts. OK, on to fracking. Task Force on Shale Gas has completed a report saying that the fracking industry needs a new regulator to give the public confidence in the fracking industry. Task Force on Shale Gas claim that they're independent, but it's actually a fracking industry-backed think tank. Task Force is urging that once the new government is in place in May, it should legislate to create a regulator ASAP. Lord Chris Smith, who heads the task force, says, speaking to local communities, we have been struck by how complex the regularity framework appears and how this leads to a lack of confidence in the system. If the industry develops and the number of the applications rises, there will be a need for a single simplified system. He said the new regulator would also involve the local community in the monitoring process and assesses the integrity of wells to make sure any problems that could lead to leaks are discovered and remedied. It's going down anyway, but they're not getting the support they need because of the oil prices. You know, the fracking firms' stocks and shares are going down, and again, another thing for Ian to maybe talk about.
A regulator needed in this failing industry. Interesting concept.
OK. Angelina Jolie has spoken out about her recent surgery to have her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed. Her decision is based on the fact that she may get cancer as she carries a BRCA1 gene. What is concerning me, I was driving to work yesterday, and on the radio they were interviewing women who already had their breasts removed, inspired by Angelina Jolie, and mutilating their bodies, and that they now, after she's been so brave as to remove her ovaries and her fallopian tubes, they were going to follow suit. So she is fully out there promoting the mutilating women's own bodies. So vile creature. And good friends with Willie Hague as well.
Well, I've no doubt that this moves in nicely into the transhumanism agenda. And if you haven't visited UK Column website recently, there is an article by Malcolm Massey leading into transhumanism and how a variety of groups in the community are being used effectively by government policy to aid this. So do have a look at that. Well, as we lead into giving the floor to John Hurst on the subject of what we can do about what's happening, let's look at a man in Plymouth who really took the law into his own hands. And here's the headline from the Plymouth Herald: Plymouth man set fire to his car after it was seized by bailiffs. A man sprayed his car with petrol and set it alight so it exploded to stop bailiffs taking it away to settle a debt. Desperate Beckham Rikika, age 42, set the Zafira car ablaze as a recovery company tried to remove it from outside his home. And he pleaded guilty to destroying by fire the Vauxhall Zafira. I think he got a 2-year suspended sentence. But look at what it says. It says the Vauxhall Zafira of an unknown value belonging to JBW Group on November the 26th last year. So JBW would appear to be the company that's taken that car. Let's have a look at them. Well, here they are, a fascinating company. Let's blow that up a bit for you. Well, what does it say here? It's a judicial services partner to UK government with operational offices in London, Lancaster and Darlington. So this is a company which boasts it's working for the British government. And let's have a look at staff. Well, here's some of their people. Our team: Jamie Waller, Chief Executive; Lee Brown, Chief Operations Officer. Well, they were quite interesting because clearly they're long-term bailiff type people. But let's have a look at this lady. Here she is, Carol Kenny. Has spent over 15 years within the enforcement sector and is passionate about changing the perception of the industry and delivering a service which meets the needs of its government clients. So here we have a man losing his car. We know that that will have been done unlawfully, certainly at common law. And here is this lovely lady who is passionate about helping the government effectively take away people's property.
Horrible.
Over to you, John.
Well, the issue here is the little known Courts, Tribunals and Enforcement Act 2007, which you can find on legislation.gov.uk. It did away with the traditional names for writs and there's a single writ now called a writ of control, where the Crown purports to have the authority to seize people's property. Guy and I have been researching it, and these companies are set up in the wake of it. It would appear. So it's not right, but they've got away with it on the basis of a statute which infringes the common law principle that only the Crown can tax. So it's not right, and it needs challenging. The difficulty is the courts never challenged the validity of our Act of Parliament. Well, they haven't for many years. They did in the Civil War period. Lord Chief Justice Coke made the point that if an Act of Parliament is contrary to common right or reason, or impossible to enforce, it will breach the common law. One of the insights that I've had recently is that Supreme Court judgments of the English-speaking world are effective throughout the English-speaking world. So in America, they had a judgment called Marbury against Manderson in 1807, which actually restated that principle. If an act's contrary to an act of Congress, in that case, it's void. So it's one of the lines we're going down to enforce Supreme Court judgments from other parts of the English-speaking world here. Until 1900, for example, American barristers and British barristers were interchangeable. The training was the same. The argument is the courts say that they'll never go against an act of Parliament, but if it's not a valid act of Parliament, they're not going against it. That's the logical position, isn't it? It's a question of getting a court to consider that something may not be valid. Classic example will be the Parliament Act 1911, which is the basis of our taxation system, and allowed the Rothschilds to lend money at you as usury, but it was never a proper act of Parliament because the laws never agreed to it. So these things need challenging, and we're working on it, shall we say?
John, just for people who may be totally new to the UK Column News, you're an ex-policeman. You've been involved now for some time with the British Constitution Group. And at a recent conference, you were the lead for setting up the grand jury system. Just tell us, why are you speaking out about what's happening in the country? And could you give us a little overview of what the grand jury did?
Well, the bottom line, we being oppressed on the basis of statute law, which is contrary to natural justice. Any 4-year-old could tell you what's right and what's wrong, and natural justice reflects that, the basic principles, what's fair. The current regime is based on acts of parliament, statutory instruments, and decisions of the Privy Council, which are done in secret, which were discussed at the conference. The remedy is in fact to challenge these, and to challenge them you need test cases, and that's what we generated at the Telford conference. So I can report on progress so far. I mean, 3-4 weeks have gone by. 3 presentments were produced. CAS is the most important one, I would argue. There was a right to bear arms one, and one on the issue of the impartiality of the Independent Police Complaints Authority. They've all been sent to the Central Criminal Court, to the list office, and there's no response. Now, I think that's good, because they're thinking about it. They haven't just sent them straight back. So they're thinking about it. And the reason they're thinking about it is that information about what had happened was also sent to the Lord Chief Justice and the Lord Chancellor. I've sent you an article called Whatever Happened to Grand Juries, and also Grand Juries What's Next, Brian. I wonder if you can make sure they're posted. Grand Juries What Next was written immediately after the conference, and it explains the logic of the actions I've taken so far. The object of the exercise is to get the attention of senior officials and make them think they may be wrong. And if they're wrong, they'll put it right as a result of their self-preservation alarms kicking in. There must be some good people. They're probably the good people. Probably the further you up the food chain, it would appear the less there are. But there are some good people, and when they realise that they've been misled, hopefully they will correct themselves. In an adversarial legal system, we need to have test cases, and that's what we've got. The Crown's principal law office is called the Attorney General, and I refer to this in the talks, which you can see on the BCG website. The Attorney General is the Crown's principal law officer and acts on behalf of the Crown in cases where the Crown's interests are at stake. Now, this person, he or she, it's a he at the moment, claims a monopoly, and he claims a monopoly that his word is final. He also claims that in order to take up a case, the Attorney General has to have an opinion of a barrister. Now, an opinion of a barrister costs a minimum of £1,500, more like £3,000, and it's a financial block to people raising issues of public rights. So I'm in the process of challenging this, and I'm challenging it on the basis of a case called Gurrier against the Majesty's Attorney General and the Post Office Union. It's 1978. John Gurrier, who's a retired army major and a good man, a founder member of the Magna Carta Society, decides to challenge a decision by the Post Office Union not to send mail to South Africa. He doesn't particularly want to send mail to South Africa, but he wants to uphold the rule of law. He was a member of a body called the Freedom Association, you might recall. He challenges the Post Office Union through the courts after they announced that they weren't going to send mail to South Africa. He tried to get the Attorney General's assistance in this, and it's a thing called a relator action. And again, I'll refer you to the conference videos. And the Attorney General decided that he wasn't going to help. And the issue was then tested in the Court of Appeal. The policy of the Attorney General, as I say, was that first you've got to get a barrister to give an opinion before he'll take the case on. And then if he doesn't like the case, he doesn't have to take it up, and you can't argue with it. Now, I've researched that particular case, the Gurrier case, and what I found is a lot of the authorities that he's relying on are very, very old. Now, normally I say that the older is the stronger it is, but the authorities relying on, for example, for the barristers, is that it was practice of an Attorney General in the early 1600s to ask a barrister to give a certificate before we look at the papers. There's no law there. There's just practice that developed. And there was the judgment in 1913 that said just because the Crown's got away with having a practice for many years, it doesn't mean it's binding if it breaches the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, as you know, contains an article that says that the subject's entitled to petition the Crown for redress of grievance. So there can't be a policy of the Attorney General which prevents people appealing, and that's been the subject of a lively correspondence between myself and a couple of officials. And eventually, it may well be that I have to take the Attorney General to court, as John Gurrier did, in order to prove that point. And once we've established that the Attorney General can't charge an exorbitant fee, in other words, the barrister's fee before people take up a case, and can't block cases and not be challenged, then the bastion that the Crown relied on for many years to protect themselves against claims will go. So that could well be the most important side effect of Telford, because it's given us a standing in a case where we're raising the issues of the subject's rights. The subject's rights being trial by jury by grand jury, as opposed to trial by jury by the petit jury only.
John, if I can just come in there, just as a very simple summary for people, am I correct in saying that what was really achieved at the British Constitution Group event was people were shown that the law exists at the moment in this country to support the setting up of grand juries. The procedure is known, and therefore by using the grand jury procedure, the general public in Britain has a very clear route to try and remedy the complete and utter failure of Britain's courts to uphold the law.
Yes, that's correct. Guy Taylor put it well. It says 12 can send you to prison, 12 can hang you. And that's what we invoked, and it's an inherent right of the individual. If 12 people get together and decide that there's a legal issue that needs addressing, that's the end of it. The Crown is required to take that on board and do something about it. And do something about it means arrange a trial. Now, as far as another role of the Attorney General is concerned, is they're expected to take over difficult and important cases. So I would argue the three presentments that we've got, the Attorney General really should take them over and run the prosecution. It shouldn't be for a private individual. A private individual will help, but the Attorney General should be assisting in cases of this nature, and that's what we're talking about. And as I say, junior. Well, it's hard to say what level the officials are. The ones that actually answer the emails. They started off by making bold statements that they were right, and they're now thinking again and looking for arguments. As I say, that's how the process works. It's adversarial. You make the other side feel uncomfortable, and then bring them around to your way of thinking.
Right, John. Last question: what role should we expect? Should we be demanding from the police in UK with regard to what has now taken place with these grand juries? Can the police simply stand to one side and wait for the Attorney General to make a decision, or should they in fact be acting to arrest anybody who isn't now pushing forward this under common law?
The police aren't part of it. The police are a modern innovation. There's always been village constables, it would appear, since time immemorial, and then prior to that, watchmen. And prior to that, for example, in fortified towns, each family would have a length of the city wall they're expected to guard and also repair through the generations. So the police are outside the loop at the moment. The only thing I will say about the police at the moment is it appears that a number of whistleblowers are looking to come forward. There was a proposal by an MP to amend the Official Secrets Act, so that could be done. But the Crown, the Home Secretary, and Mr. Damien Green MP, who in fact was subject to one of the presentments, have both misled the public. What they've said is that it's safe to come forward and we won't prosecute you. We will suspend the law. Now, that principle was tested about 15 years ago in the Pretty case. Mrs. Pretty had motor neurone disease. Her husband wanted to switch off the machines that were keeping her alive. He wrote to the Lord Chancellor saying, "Right, I want authority to do this, and I promise you won't prosecute me." And the judgment was the Bill of Rights forbid the Crown for suspending the law. We can't possibly give you an immunity in advance. So it's in our favour for the Bill of Rights. Individuals who want to spill the beans.
Right.
So the police don't really have a role because the public are the police, and we're expected to have. We've got police powers effectively when we investigate as a posse, and when we prosecute, we're doing for no pay what a policeman does for pay.
Okay. Well, John, we're going to look to do some more in-depth reports on this and the process of how the grand jury goes, and obviously we're going to be following very closely
Yes, indeed. Yeah, these things take time, unfortunately, because there's a 10-day rule. The government departments are supposed to respond within 10 working days. That means they always respond on the 9th or 10th day. So it's a slow process, but we'll keep you informed. What I intend to do next week is to go to my local magistrates course with a specimen, one of the three presentments, present it in the normal way as an information, and I'll keep you posted on that one. That will be another way of getting an opportunity for judicial review. As saying in the adversarial system, you have to poke the other side to do something wrong, and then you've got grounds to challenge. So I'll keep you posted on that one.
Thanks, John.
The third thing I will say is that as far as civil claims for damages are concerned, some of these need to go in. So I'm going a conversation with Strider and CAS, and we're going to select an example of maladministration where a local authority has done something wrong to the detriment of CAS and put a claim in that way. So it'll be going through the civil courts and the criminal courts. There won't be the same facts, because if you have the same facts, the civil case is set aside until the criminal's finished with. So we'll choose two different sets of facts, and then we'll keep you posted on that one.
Okay, John, thank you for that. We must move on. The clock's ticking. We just remind people that they can get more information on the British Constitution Group website, and videos of the conference are also posted there. And we're brave enough to say that we also think people, as well as working in this very often dark area, need some light relief. We're pleased to release the Awful Rebels video from the conference. 20 minutes, as Nick says, of unique conference footage. Sound quality a bit poor, and therefore we've reduced the price of this excellent video to £49.99. It's a bargain. Well, let's come back to our carrier story that we mentioned earlier. Let's remember, of course, the BBC is using Game Boy journalism in order to promote the election. Meanwhile, the reality in this country is something serious going on in every area, but particularly defence. Let's have a look at this Russia Today article about the carrier. What it said was each of the two British carriers was designed to accommodate 36 F-35s, but unfortunately Mod has only agreed to purchase 8, with each one costing around £100 million. So it would imply a cost of many billions to equip the carriers. That's what the MPs have said. Well, let's bring in this man. We're going to say, luckily for the general public, First Sea Lord Admiral Zambellis, KCB, DSC, ADC, very astute man. Let's have a look at what the head man in the Royal Navy has to say on this subject. He says that there is no point in having the aircraft carriers without jets. Well, my goodness, we can sleep soundly in our beds tonight knowing that the head of the Royal Navy has actually worked out that there's no point in having aircraft carriers if they don't have any aircraft. But of course, when were the decisions made about these carriers? Many years ago. So let's bring in some of the old faces. And here's the Western Morning News promoting Admiral Lord West of Spithead. He was down in the Falklands. Unfortunately, his ship was sunk. But he says that the overall Mod approach to defence policy has, quote, not been cleverly put together. And what we're seeing in the last couple of days is that the Ministry of Defence is going to bolster the defence of the Falkland Islands by sending, yes, 2 Chinook aircraft. Well, clearly that is going to frighten away the Argentinians, and it's certainly going to frighten the Russians. Not one, but they're sending 2. Wow. 2 whole helicopters. And of course, as Lord West stepped forward to give us his opinion, we've got Lord Boyce has been coming in, calling for the government to invest in more ships. Well, of course, ships don't arrive overnight. They have to be procured, and there is a lead-in time. So my question is, what were you doing, Lord Boyce, when the government was destroying the Navy in your time? Let's have a look at him. Here he is. We don't know whether this is true, but somebody with a sense of humour contacted us this morning to say they believe this gentleman, Sir Graham Boyce, senior advisor, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, is his brother. Now, we don't know whether this is true. We'd be very interested to know, and we'll wait and see. But who are the men driving the policy? Well, a very bloated David Cameron. We've said the empty head of British government. We're going to stick by that. We've got this sort of man, Sir John Sawyers, head of intelligence, but not so intelligent that he didn't release stuff to Twitter. Well, actually, I think it was his wife shared these wonderful beach pictures with us. And oh, look, well, here's Alan West playing pirates when perhaps he should have been looking after the Navy. And when he wasn't playing pirates, of course, he was pretending that he was James Bond with his floozy there. So this is the man. He's now being bigged up by the press as the person we should listen to about defence. Of course, this was the man who lost documents on a towpath at a subsequent court-martial. He pleaded guilty to charges of negligence and breaching security. And, of course, he was then promoted. But he's also been involved in determining the cyber security policy for government. And if you can just bring me back on screen, I'm just going to make a small adjustment to the flow here live. It's pretty important that we can do this because the BBC can't do it with a budget of 3.65 billion. Bring in Francis Maude because the UK column 17 hours ago, in fact, said that Francis Maude was spinning a cyber web deal with the Israelis. Let's bring this on screen. Back in 2014, he had been visiting Israel to discuss cyber security cooperation, and the UK column now understands that there's been a deal done where Israeli cyber security technology is going to be used in the spy station GCHQ. But don't worry, this is just a coincidence.
There's no such thing.
Well, we'll end there. Thank you very much for joining us, John.
Thank you, John.
We will report more on the British Constitution Group and grand juries. And
yeah, just to remind everyone, we've still got bumper stickers, T-shirts and leaflets. If anyone is interested in them, please get in touch with Carol, CAROLE, at ukcolumn.org. There's also free Melanie Shaw T-shirts still available. There's a few left for anyone who's going to be going to her event. Is it this Sunday or next Sunday?
it's the 5th.
The 5th. So anyone who's going to go and support and wants a T-shirt, you can get all of them via Carol at ukcolumn.org. And we'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John Hurst.
Turn off the BBC if you like to save electricity. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.